The dust cloud on the horizon meant only one thing in Mineral Point, Wisconsin in the summer of 1876. Someone was coming who either needed help desperately or was bringing trouble, and Adelaide Stone had learned through bitter experience that those two things were often the same. She stood on the porch of her small boarding house at the edge of town, shielding her eyes against the afternoon sun as the rider approached. Her hand instinctively moved to the derringer she kept in her apron pocket, a habit she had developed 3 years ago when everything in her life had fallen apart. The rider was tall in the saddle, moving with the easy confidence of someone who had spent more time on horseback than on foot. As he drew closer, Adelaide could make out a worn leather duster, a hat pulled low, and the unmistakable bearing of a man who had seen his share of hard living. He dismounted in front of her establishment, his movements fluid despite what must have been hours in the saddle. When he looked up, Adelaide found herself staring into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a face that was weathered but handsome, with lines that spoke of both laughter and sorrow. He looked to be in his late 20s, perhaps 30 at most, with dark hair that needed a trim and a few days' worth of stubble on his jaw. "Madam," he said, his voice rough from trail dust, "I'm looking for a room if you have one available. Name's Bennett Young." Adelaide hesitated, as she always did with new guests. Her boarding house was known for being clean and respectable, but it was also known for being selective. She had turned away more than one drifter whose eyes held too much meanness or whose questions were too pointed. This man, though, had something different in his gaze, something weary and honest. "I have a room," she said finally. "It's $3 a week, meals included, no drinking, no fighting, and no guests after 9 o'clock. Bennett Young nodded, reaching into his vest pocket to pull out a worn leather wallet. "That suits me fine. I'm hoping to find work around here, maybe stay on for a while if things work out." "There's work at the mines if you're willing," Adelaide said, accepting his payment and stepping back to let him enter. "Or the Hutchinson Ranch is always looking for hands. You have experience with cattle, some," Bennett said, removing his hat as he crossed the threshold. "I've done most everything at one point or another. Cattle, horses, even some farming, though I'm better with animals than crops." The boarding house was modest but well maintained. Adelaide had worked hard to make it a place she could be proud of, scrubbing and painting and repairing, until every corner reflected her determination to build something good from the ashes of her past. The front room served as a common area, with a stone fireplace and several comfortable chairs arranged around it. A dining table occupied the space near the kitchen, and a narrow staircase led to the second floor where the guest rooms were located. "I have 4 rooms for rent," Adelaide explained as she led him upstairs. "Right now, you'll be my only guest, which means meals might be a bit simpler than usual, but I promise you won't go hungry." She opened the door to the corner room, which had a window overlooking the street and another facing the open prairie beyond town. "This one has the best light and catches the evening breeze when the weather's hot." Bennett stepped into the room and set his saddlebags down on the simple wooden chair near the bed. "This is more than adequate, Miss Stone," Adelaide supplied. "Adelaide Stone. I own the boarding house and do all the cooking and cleaning myself. Mrs. Stone." Bennett asked, glancing at her left hand. "Miss," Adelaide corrected, her voice cooling slightly. She saw the question forming in his eyes, the natural curiosity about why a young woman would be running a boarding house alone on the edge of civilization, and she spoke quickly to forestall it. "I'll have supper ready at 6. There's a wash basin and fresh water in the pitcher. The privy is out back, and there's a bathhouse in town if you want a proper bath." She left before he could ask anything else, her heart beating faster than she liked. It had been a long time since a man had looked at her with anything approaching interest, and she had convinced herself she preferred it that way. Men brought complications, and she had promised herself no more complications. That evening, Adelaide prepared a simple meal of beef stew, cornbread, and the last of her canned peaches from the previous autumn. She set the table with care, trying not to acknowledge that she was making more effort than usual, because she had a guest who looked at her with kind eyes instead of the speculation or pity she often encountered in town. Bennett came down promptly at 6, his hair damp and his face freshly shaved. He had changed into a clean shirt, and Adelaide noticed that, despite his worn clothing, everything was neat and well cared for. He was the kind of man who took pride in himself without being vain about it. "Smells wonderful," he said, taking the seat she indicated. "I haven't had a home-cooked meal in longer than I care to admit." "You've been traveling long?" Adelaide asked, ladling stew into his bowl. "Long enough," Bennett replied. He waited until she had served herself and sat down before he began eating, another mark of good breeding that surprised her. Most cowboys she had known were not so mindful of manners. "I've been working my way north from Texas. Took a job driving cattle up to Kansas, then worked on a ranch outside Dodge City for a while. But I was ready for a change, somewhere quieter." "Mineral Point is certainly quieter than Dodge City," Adelaide said with a slight smile. "Though we have our moments. The mines bring in all sorts, and the railroad passing through means we get our share of travelers." They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes, and Adelaide found herself relaxing in a way she rarely did around strangers. There was something steady about Bennett Young, something that suggested he was exactly what he appeared to be, with no hidden agendas or ulterior motives. "This is excellent," Bennett said, breaking the silence. "You're a fine cook, Miss Stone." "Thank you," Adelaide replied, feeling a flush of pleasure at the genuine compliment. "I learned from my mother. She always said that a good meal could solve half the world's problems, or at least make them easier to bear." "Wise woman," Bennett said. "Is she here in Mineral Point?" The question was innocent, but Adelaide felt her defenses rise immediately. "No," she said shortly. "She passed away several years ago." Bennett nodded, seeming to sense that he had ventured into unwelcome territory. "I'm sorry for your loss. My own mother died when I was 15. Fever took her one winter, and my father followed within the year. I've been on my own since then." Adelaide softened slightly at this revelation. "That must have been difficult, being so young." "It was," Bennett admitted, "but it taught me to stand on my own feet and to value the good things when they come along." He met her eyes across the table, and Adelaide felt a flutter in her chest that she immediately tried to suppress. A meal like this, for instance, shared with pleasant company, those are the things that make life worth living. Adelaide stood abruptly, gathering the empty bowls with hands that trembled slightly. "I have peaches for dessert," she said, needing to move, to do something to break the strange intimacy that had developed. "And coffee if you'd like." "Both sound perfect," Bennett said quietly, and if he noticed her sudden nervousness, he was gentleman enough not to mention it. The next few days fell into an easy rhythm. Bennett found work at the Hutchinson Ranch, just as Adelaide had suggested, and he quickly proved himself capable with both horses and cattle. He returned each evening tired but satisfied, always with a kind word and an appreciation for the meals Adelaide prepared. He never pried into her business, never asked uncomfortable questions, and never made her feel anything but respected in her own home. It was precisely this respectful distance that began to wear down Adelaide's carefully constructed walls. She found herself looking forward to their evening meals, preparing dishes with extra care, and lingering over coffee afterward as they talked about small, safe things. Bennett told her about the ranch work, about the horses he was training and the challenges of working with cattle in the Wisconsin heat. Adelaide shared stories about her boarding house guests over the years, the characters who had passed through, and the few who had become friends. What she did not share was anything about her life before Mineral Point, and Bennett never asked. But Adelaide could feel the unspoken questions hanging in the air between them, growing heavier with each passing day. It was nearly 2 weeks after Bennett's arrival when everything changed. Adelaide had gone into town to purchase supplies, leaving Bennett a note that she would return by evening. The general store was busy, and she found herself standing in line behind Martha Henderson, one of the town's most notorious gossips. "Adelaide Stone," Martha said, turning with a smile that did not reach her eyes. "I hear you have a new boarder, that handsome cowboy who's working out at the Hutchinson place." "I do," Adelaide replied evenly, refusing to take the bait. "Isn't that cozy, just the two of you in that house?" Martha continued, her voice dripping with false sweetness. "People are talking, you know, wondering if perhaps you're being a bit too friendly with your tenant." Adelaide felt her face flush with anger and embarrassment. "Mr. Young is a paying guest, nothing more, and what people choose to gossip about says more about them than it does about me." "Oh, I'm sure that's true," Martha said with a knowing look. "After all, it's not as if you have the best reputation to protect, given your history. Still, one would think you'd be more careful about appearances." The words hit Adelaide like a physical blow, bringing back all the shame and pain she had worked so hard to bury. She abandoned her shopping basket and fled the store, barely managing to hold back tears until she reached the privacy of her wagon. By the time she drove back to the boarding house, the tears had stopped, replaced by the familiar numbness that had been her shield for so long. Bennett was already home when she arrived, earlier than usual. He came out to help her with the wagon, his smile fading when he saw her face. "What happened?" he asked immediately. "Are you hurt?" "I'm fine," Adelaide said automatically, brushing past him toward the house. Bennett caught her arm gently, his touch careful and respectful. "You're not fine. Something's upset you." Adelaide pulled away, suddenly furious at him for being kind, for making her want things she could not have, for representing everything that her past had stolen from her. "Just leave me alone," she said sharply. "You don't know anything about me." "Then tell me," Bennett said simply. "Whatever it is, whatever's hurting you, tell me." "Why?" Adelaide demanded, whirling to face him. "Why do you care? You're just passing through like everyone else. In a month or two, you'll move on to somewhere new, and I'll still be here, still trying to live down a past that won't let me go." Bennett's expression remained calm, his eyes steady on hers. "I'm not planning to move on," he said. "I came here looking for a place to settle, to build something lasting. And I care because I've come to respect you, Adelaide. You're strong and capable and kind, and whatever your past holds, I doubt it's as terrible as you think." The words broke something loose inside Adelaide, and before she could stop herself, everything came pouring out. "You want to know about my past? Fine. I'll tell you. 5 years ago, I was engaged to be married. His name was Thomas, and he was the son of a prominent family in Milwaukee. I thought I loved him, and I believed he loved me. We were planning a wedding, planning a life together. And then I discovered I was pregnant." She watched Bennett's face carefully, waiting for the judgment or disgust, but he only listened, his expression grave but not condemning. "I was 19 years old," Adelaide continued, the words coming faster now, as if a dam had burst. "Young and stupid and so in love that I convinced myself it would be all right. But when I told Thomas about the baby, he changed. Suddenly, he claimed he wasn't sure the child was his." He said terrible things, accused me of being with other men. His family turned against me, and then my own father threw me out of his house, called me a disgrace to the family name. Adelaide wrapped her arms around herself, the memories as painful now as they had been then. I lost the baby 2 months later. I was alone, living in a boarding house not so different from this one, and I just started bleeding one night and couldn't stop. By the time I got to a doctor, it was too late. The baby was gone, and the doctor told me the damage was severe. He said I would probably never have children. She forced herself to meet Bennett's eyes, needing him to understand the full extent of her ruin. So that's who I am. I'm a fallen woman who lost the only child she'll ever have. I'm the daughter my father disowned and the fiancée who wasn't good enough to marry. I came to Mineral Point 3 years ago because no one here knew my story, and I could start over. But the past follows you, Bennett. People always find out and then they look at you differently. Like Martha Henderson in town today, reminding me that no matter how hard I work or how respectable I try to be, I'll always be that foolish girl who gave herself to a man who didn't deserve her. Adelaide felt drained after the confession, hollow and exposed. She waited for Bennett to make his excuses, to tell her he would be moving on after all. Instead, he was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant. "My father killed 3 men," Bennett said finally, his voice low. "Not in self-defense, not in war. He killed them in cold blood over a gambling debt. I was 14 years old when it happened, old enough to understand what it meant. The law came for him, and there was a trial. They hanged him on a Tuesday morning and the whole town turned out to watch." Adelaide stared at him, shocked into silence. Bennett continued, his words measured and painful. "My mother never recovered from the shame. She took to her bed and just faded away, like she couldn't find a reason to keep living in a world where everyone knew her husband was a murderer. And I was left to grow up with that legacy, the son of a killer. People looked at me and wondered if I had the same darkness in me, if violence ran in my blood." He turned to face Adelaide directly, and she saw the old pain in his eyes. "When I was 17, I got into a fight with a man who said my father had gotten what he deserved. I beat him badly, put him in bed for a week. And for a long time after that, I wondered if maybe everyone was right about me. Maybe I was my father's son in the worst possible way." "Bennett," Adelaide whispered, but he held up a hand. "Let me finish," he said. "I spent years running from that fear, moving from place to place, never staying long enough for anyone to learn my story. I worked hard, kept my head down, and tried to prove to myself that I was different. But it wasn't until I met an old rancher outside of Santa Fe that things started to change. His name was Samuel, and he was dying of consumption. He needed help running his place for his last months, and I signed on." Bennett's expression softened at the memory. "Samuel knew my story. I don't know how, but he did. And one night when we were sitting out under the stars, he told me something I've never forgotten. He said that our past is part of us, but it doesn't have to define us. He said that every sunrise is a chance to choose who we want to be, and that tomorrow always holds more possibility than yesterday." He stepped closer to Adelaide, his eyes intense and sincere. "I've done things I'm not proud of, Adelaide. I've been angry and violent, and there were times I proved everyone right about me being my father's son. But I'm not that person anymore because I choose not to be. Every morning, I wake up and I choose to believe that I can be better, that tomorrow can be different." Adelaide felt tears sliding down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. "Martha Henderson said people are talking about us," she said quietly, "about me being too friendly with my boarder. It reminded me that no matter what I do, there will always be people who see me as that ruined girl. Then let them. Bennett said simply. Their narrow minds and cruel tongues say nothing about who you actually are. You're a woman who survived betrayal and loss, who built a life for herself through hard work and determination. You're kind and strong and brave, and anyone who can't see that isn't worth your time or tears. You don't understand, Adelaide protested weakly. If people start talking seriously, it could ruin my business. I could lose everything I've built. Bennett was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke, his voice was careful. Then maybe we give them something real to talk about. Adelaide's breath caught. What do you mean? I mean that I've been falling in love with you since the first night I sat at your table, Bennett said, the words direct and honest. I wake up thinking about you, and I spend my days working hard so I'll be worthy of the smile you give me at supper. I know it's too soon, and I know your past has given you every reason to mistrust men, but I also know that I came to Mineral Point looking for a place to belong, and I found it the moment I met you. Adelaide's heart was racing, torn between hope and fear. Bennett, you can't say things like that. You don't know what you're asking for. I'm not asking for anything, Bennett replied. I'm just telling you the truth. Your past doesn't scare me, Adelaide. Mine is darker, and I still believe in tomorrow. I still believe that two broken people can help each other heal, that they can build something good together. What if I can't give you children? Adelaide asked, the question that haunted her most painful dreams. What if the doctor was right and I'm barren? Bennett stepped even closer, close enough that Adelaide could see the gold flecks in his blue eyes. Then we'll have a life rich in other ways. We'll fill our home with love and laughter, and if we want children, there are orphans in this world who need families. But honestly, Adelaide, all I want is you. Everything else is just details. Adelaide wanted desperately to believe him, to take the leap of faith he was offering, but fear held her back, the old wound still too fresh. I need time, she whispered. This is all too much, too fast. I understand, Bennett said, stepping back to give her space. Take all the time you need. I'm not going anywhere. The next few days were strange and strained. Adelaide threw herself into her work, cooking and cleaning with furious energy while trying to sort through the tangle of emotions Bennett's confession had stirred up. He kept his word and gave her space, treating her with the same respectful courtesy as always, never pushing or demanding. But Adelaide found herself watching him when she thought he wasn't looking, noticing the way he moved with quiet confidence, the gentleness with which he handled everything from his horse to the dishes he insisted on washing after meals. She saw how he greeted her with a smile each evening, despite the long hours of hard work at the ranch. She noticed the way he treated others in town with respect and kindness, even when he received curious looks or whispered speculation. It was on a Sunday morning, exactly 3 weeks after Bennett had first arrived, that Adelaide made her decision. She had gone to church, something she did irregularly and with mixed feelings. The sermon that day was about forgiveness and new beginnings, about the God who made all things new. As she sat in the hard wooden pew, Adelaide realized that she had spent 3 years punishing herself for mistakes that had already cost her dearly. She had hidden away in her boarding house, keeping the world at arm's length because she was afraid of being hurt again. But Bennett was right. Every tomorrow held possibility, and she was tired of living in yesterday's pain. She found him at the boarding house when she returned, sitting on the front porch with a book in his hands. He looked up as she approached, a question in his eyes. I've been thinking about what you said, Adelaide began without preamble, about your past being darker and still believing in tomorrow. Bennett set the book aside and stood, his full attention on her. And I realized that I've been so busy protecting myself from being hurt again that I've been hurting myself instead, Adelaide said. I've been hiding from life, from possibility, from happiness. I don't want to do that anymore." "What do you want?" Bennett asked quietly. Adelaide took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I want to try. I want to believe that tomorrow can be better than yesterday, and I want to do it with you if the offer is still open." Bennett's face lit up with a joy so pure and unguarded that it made Adelaide's heart ache. "The offer will always be open," he said, "for as long as you'll have me." He held out his hand and Adelaide took it, feeling the warmth and strength of his grip. It was not a grand romantic gesture, but it felt like a promise, solid and real. "I'm still scared," Adelaide admitted. "Scared of being hurt, scared of what people will say, scared that I won't be enough." "I'm scared too," Bennett said. "Scared that I'll disappoint you, that my past will catch up with me, that I'll somehow prove unworthy of your trust. But I think maybe that's part of love, being scared and choosing to try anyway." "When did you become so wise?" Adelaide asked with a tremulous smile. "I'm not wise," Bennett replied, gently pulling her closer. "I'm just a man who knows a miracle when he sees one, and I'm not foolish enough to let you slip away." He leaned down slowly, giving Adelaide every chance to pull back, but she met him halfway. The kiss was gentle and sweet, full of promise and hope. When they separated, Adelaide felt lighter than she had in years, as if the weight of her past had finally begun to lift. "What happens now?" she asked. "Now we take it one day at a time," Bennett said. "I court you properly if you'll allow it. We get to know each other better, and we let the town see that we're serious about each other. And when you're ready, if you're ready, I'll ask you to marry me." "And if the gossips make trouble?" Adelaide asked. Bennett shrugged. "Let them talk. We'll know the truth, and that's what matters. Besides, I'm told that a proper marriage silences even the most determined gossip." Adelaide laughed, the sound bubbling up unexpectedly. "You have this all figured out, don't you?" "Not even close," Bennett admitted with a grin. "I'm making this up as I go along, just like everyone else. But I figure as long as I have you by my side, I can figure out the rest." True to his word, Bennett courted Adelaide with patience and determination. He took her on walks through town, ignoring the stares and whispers, his hand steady on her arm. He accompanied her to church on Sundays, sitting beside her in the pew and singing hymns in a pleasant baritone. He helped her with the heavy work around the boarding house, fixing the loose board on the porch steps and repairing the leak in the roof. And every evening they talked. Long conversations that stretched late into the night, sharing stories and dreams and fears. Bennett told her about his travels, about the places he had seen and the people he had met. He spoke about his father with a mixture of sadness and anger, working through his complicated feelings about a man who had been both loved and monstrous. Adelaide shared memories of her mother, the lessons she had learned, and the love she had lost. She talked about Thomas and the betrayal that had shattered her world, slowly draining the poison from the wound so that healing could finally begin. They talked about practical things, too. Bennett's work at the Hutchinson Ranch was going well, and he had saved nearly every penny of his wages. Adelaide's boarding house was profitable, especially during the busy summer months when miners and travelers filled her rooms. Together, they began to imagine a future that included both of them, a life built on mutual respect and shared effort. It was nearly 2 months after that first kiss when Bennett formally proposed. He took Adelaide on a picnic out to the bluffs overlooking Mineral Point, where the Wisconsin hills rolled away in shades of green and gold. The afternoon was perfect, warm but not hot, with a breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers and prairie grass. They had finished eating, and Adelaide was leaning back on her elbows, her face turned up to the sun, when Bennett reached into his pocket and pulled out a small wooden box. "Adelaide," he said, and something in his voice made her sit up and look at him. I know we haven't known each other long by some standards, but I've lived enough life to know that time isn't what matters. What matters is that every day I spend with you, I'm more certain that you're the person I want to build a life with." He opened the box to reveal a simple gold band with a small but beautiful sapphire set in it. "This ring was my mother's," Bennett said. "It's the only thing of hers I kept after she died. I've carried it with me all these years, waiting for the right person to give it to. And now I've found her." Adelaide felt tears welling up, but they were good tears, born of joy rather than pain. "Bennett," she whispered. "I love you," Bennett continued, his voice steady and sure. "I love your strength and your kindness, your determination and your generous heart. I love the way you hum when you cook and the way you bite your lip when you're concentrating. I love how you care for people, even when they don't deserve it. And I want to spend the rest of my life showing you that you are worthy of love, worthy of respect, worthy of all the happiness this world can offer." He held out the ring, his eyes never leaving hers. "Adelaide Stone, will you marry me?" Adelaide did not hesitate. "Yes," she said, the word coming out strong and clear. "Yes, I'll marry you." Bennett slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years just for her. Then he pulled her into his arms, holding her close while Adelaide laughed and cried at the same time, overwhelmed by the sheer, unexpected joy of it all. "I love you too," she said against his chest, feeling his heart beat steady and strong beneath her cheek. "I think I started loving you that first night when you waited for me to sit down before you started eating. It was such a small thing, but it showed me who you were, the kind of man you are." "A man madly in love with his landlady," Bennett teased gently. "A man who sees people, really sees them," Adelaide corrected. "A man who looks at my past and sees a survivor instead of a scandal, a man who believes in tomorrow." They were married 6 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Mineral Point. Adelaide wore a dress of pale blue silk that she had sewn herself, working on it late into the night while Bennett was at the ranch. Bennett wore a new suit, the first he had owned in years, purchased with his carefully saved wages and tailored to fit his tall frame. The church was not full, but the people who came were those who mattered. Jacob Hutchinson, Bennett's employer, attended with his wife and 3 children. Several of Adelaide's regular boarders came, the miners and travelers who had stayed with her over the years and had seen her kindness firsthand. Even Martha Henderson attended, though she sat in the back and left immediately after the ceremony without offering congratulations. Adelaide found she did not care. As she stood beside Bennett and spoke her vows, promising to love and honor him for all her days, she felt nothing but happiness. The past was still there, the scars and memories that would always be part of her story, but they no longer defined her. She was Adelaide Young now, wife to a good man and partner in a new life. The reception was held at the boarding house, with food and drink Adelaide had prepared in advance. It was a modest celebration, but filled with warmth and laughter. Jacob Hutchinson gave a toast, speaking of Bennett's skill as a horseman and his integrity as a man. One of the miners, a grizzled old man named Pete who had stayed with Adelaide for 3 summers running, raised his glass and said simply, "To the lady who makes the best beef stew west of the Mississippi and has a heart to match." As the evening wore on and their guests gradually departed, Adelaide and Bennett found themselves alone in the boarding house that was now truly their home. Bennett had moved his few possessions into Adelaide's room, and they stood together looking at the space they would share. "Nervous?" Bennett asked quietly, taking her hand. "A little," Adelaide admitted. "It's been a long time since I trusted anyone this much." Bennett turned to face her, his expression serious. "I meant what I said in my vows. I will honor you and cherish you, Adelaide." Your trust is a gift I will never take for granted." "I know," Adelaide said, and she did. Whatever fears she had were not about Bennett's character or intentions. They were the ghosts of old wounds, and she was learning to face them down. "Show me that tomorrow is better than yesterday." Bennett smiled and drew her close, and as his lips met hers, Adelaide felt the last of her walls crumble. This was what it meant to be truly known and truly loved, to stand before another person with all your flaws and scars visible and be told that you are enough, you are wanted, you are cherished. They made love that night with tenderness and patience, learning each other's bodies and hearts. Bennett was gentle, always attentive to Adelaide's comfort and pleasure. There was passion but also sweetness, the physical expression of emotions that had been building for months. Afterward, lying in Bennett's arms in the darkness, Adelaide felt a peace she had not known in years. The future was uncertain, as it always was, but for the first time she faced it without fear. The next months passed in a blur of work and happiness. Bennett continued at the Hutchinson Ranch, proving himself so valuable that Jacob offered him a partnership stake in the operation. It was a generous offer, and one that meant real security for their future. Adelaide kept running the boarding house, though now with Bennett's help she was able to take on more guests and expand her services. They worked as a team, each supporting the other's efforts and dreams. As autumn arrived and the leaves began to turn, Adelaide received an unexpected letter. It had been forwarded through several addresses before finally reaching Mineral Point, and the handwriting on the envelope made her hands tremble. It was from her father. She stood in the kitchen, staring at the letter for a long moment before Bennett came in from feeding the horses. He saw her face and immediately came to her side. "What is it?" he asked. "Letter from my father," Adelaide said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I haven't heard from him in 5 years, since the day he threw me out." Bennett put his arm around her shoulders. "Do you want to open it?" Adelaide did not know what she wanted. Part of her wanted to throw the letter in the fire unread, to reject her father as completely as he had rejected her. But another part, the part that still remembered being a little girl on her father's knee, needed to know what he had to say. With shaking hands, she opened the envelope and unfolded the single page inside. Bennett stood beside her, his presence steady and supportive as she read. The letter was short and stiff, written in her father's precise hand. He informed her that he had been diagnosed with a serious illness, and that the doctors expected he had less than a year to live. He wrote that he had been thinking about the past and about the harshness with which he had treated her. He stopped short of a full apology, but he expressed regret for the estrangement and asked if she might consider visiting him before it was too late. Adelaide read the letter twice, then handed it to Bennett without a word. He read it quickly, his expression thoughtful. "What do you want to do?" he asked. "I don't know," Adelaide said honestly. "Part of me wants nothing to do with him. He made his choice 5 years ago and it nearly destroyed me. But another part of me remembers that he's still my father, and if I don't go, I'll have to live with that decision after he's gone." Bennett nodded slowly. "I can't tell you what to do, Adelaide. This is your decision and yours alone. But I can tell you that I'll support whatever you choose. If you want to go to Milwaukee and see him, I'll go with you. If you want to write back and tell him you're not ready for that, I'll support that too. And if you want to throw the letter away and never think about it again, that's also your right." Adelaide leaned against him, drawing strength from his steady presence. "I think I need to go," she said finally. "Not for him, but for me. I need to close that door properly to lay those ghosts to rest." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Bennett assured her. "When do you want to leave?" They made the journey to Milwaukee a week later, traveling by train and staying in a small hotel near Adelaide's childhood home. The city felt strange and familiar all at once, full of memories both good and painful. Adelaide had not been back since that terrible day when her father had called her a disgrace and ordered her to leave. The house looked smaller than Adelaide remembered, a modest two-story frame structure in a respectable neighborhood. She stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, gathering her courage while Bennett waited patiently beside her. "I'm here," she said finally. "Let's get this over with." Her knock was answered by a tired-looking woman Adelaide did not recognize, probably a hired nurse given her father's illness. The woman led them through the familiar hallway to the study where Adelaide's father spent most of his time. Richard Stone looked old and shrunken in his chair, his face gaunt and his color poor. He had been a big man once, imposing and stern, but illness had reduced him to a shadow. When he saw Adelaide in the doorway, something flickered in his eyes, an emotion too complex to name. "Adelaide," he said, his voice raspy. "You came." "I got your letter," Adelaide replied, staying near the door. Bennett was a steady presence just behind her, and she was grateful for his support. "This is my husband, Bennett Young." Her father's gaze shifted to Bennett, assessing him with the same critical eye Adelaide remembered from her youth. "Your husband," he repeated. "You're married then?" "I am," Adelaide said firmly. "We were married 3 months ago in Mineral Point, Wisconsin. Bennett is a horseman and ranch partner, and we have a good life together." "I see," her father said. He was quiet for a moment, and Adelaide could see him struggling with words that did not come easily. "I was wrong," he said finally, each syllable seeming to cost him. "About you, about what happened. I was harsh and judgmental, and I let my pride and my concern for what others thought matter more than my own daughter." Adelaide felt tears pricking her eyes but refused to let them fall. "You called me a disgrace. You threw me out of your house when I needed you most." "I know," her father said, and now his own eyes were wet. "I was wrong, and I've regretted it every day since. I let my anger and disappointment blind me to the fact that you were hurting, that you needed your father. And by the time I realized my mistake, I didn't know how to reach out, how to take back the terrible things I'd said." "You could have written," Adelaide said, her voice breaking. "You could have tried to find me to tell me you were sorry. I was alone for so long, trying to build a life from nothing, thinking that my own father hated me." "I didn't hate you," her father said urgently. "I never hated you. I was ashamed of myself, of how I'd acted. I thought you were better off without me, that you'd moved on and wouldn't want to hear from the father who had failed you so completely." Bennett spoke for the first time, his voice calm and measured. "With respect, sir, that was Adelaide's decision to make, not yours. You took away her choice once when you threw her out. Taking away her choice to forgive you or not was a second failing." Adelaide glanced back at Bennett gratefully, then returned her attention to her father. "He's right. You should have written, should have at least tried. But you didn't, and I had to learn to live with that. I had to build a life and find my own strength." "And you did," her father said, looking at her with something that might have been pride. "You survived and thrived, and you found a good man who stands by you. You're stronger than I ever gave you credit for, Adelaide. Stronger than I was when it mattered." Adelaide felt the anger and hurt that she had carried for 5 years begin to shift, not disappearing but transforming into something else. Her father was dying, reduced and humbled by illness and regret. She could hold onto her justified anger, or she could choose to let it go, not for his sake but for her own. "I forgive you," she said quietly, and felt Bennett's hand squeeze her shoulder in support. "Not because what you did was acceptable, but because I don't want to carry this burden anymore. I've built a good life in Mineral Point, and I don't want the past to poison it." Her father sagged in his chair, relief evident in every line of his face. "Thank you," he whispered. Thank you, Adelaide. They stayed for an hour, making careful small talk about neutral topics. Adelaide told him about her boarding house and the town of Mineral Point. Bennett spoke about the ranch and his work with horses. It was not the reunion of loving family members, but it was civil and respectful, which was perhaps all that could be expected given the circumstances. As they were preparing to leave, her father asked Adelaide to wait a moment. He had the nurse bring him a small wooden box from his desk drawer. "This was your mother's," he said, handing it to Adelaide. "Her jewelry, such as it was. I should have given it to you years ago, but I was too stubborn and too proud. It's yours now to do with as you wish." Adelaide opened the box to find her mother's simple pearl necklace, a cameo brooch, and a pair of delicate gold earrings. She remembered her mother wearing each piece, remembered watching her get dressed for church on Sunday mornings. "Thank you," Adelaide said, her voice thick with emotion. "I'll treasure these." Her father nodded, and for just a moment, Adelaide saw the man he had been before grief and pride had hardened him. "Be happy, Adelaide. That's all your mother would have wanted for you, and it's what I want too, even if I failed to show it when it mattered most." The train ride back to Mineral Point was quiet. Adelaide sat with the wooden box in her lap, turning it over in her hands while Bennett watched her with concern. "Are you all right?" he asked finally. Adelaide considered the question carefully. "I think so," she said. "It wasn't the reunion I might have hoped for when I was younger, but it was what it needed to be. I got to say my piece, and he apologized in his way. The wounds are still there, but they feel different now, like they can finally start to heal properly." "I'm proud of you," Bennett said, taking her hand. "It took courage to face him like that, to offer forgiveness when you had every right to hold on to your anger." "I learned it from you," Adelaide said, squeezing his hand. "You taught me that tomorrow holds more possibility than yesterday, that we don't have to be defined by our worst moments. If you could believe that despite your father's crimes and your own mistakes, then I could believe it too." Bennett pulled her close, and Adelaide rested her head on his shoulder as the train carried them home. She felt lighter somehow, as if forgiving her father had freed her from a weight she had not fully realized she was carrying. The months that followed were peaceful and productive. Bennett's partnership at the Hutchinson Ranch grew more substantial, and Adelaide's boarding house was rarely empty. They saved their money carefully, talking about the future and the possibility of buying their own land someday, building a ranch that would be truly theirs. It was a cold February evening when Adelaide realized she had missed her monthly courses. She waited another 2 weeks before saying anything, not wanting to get Bennett's hopes up, not wanting to face the disappointment if she was wrong. But when a third week passed, and she began feeling queasy in the mornings, she could no longer deny the possibility. She went to see Dr. Harrison, the elderly physician who served Mineral Point and the surrounding farms. He examined her carefully and confirmed what Adelaide had barely allowed herself to hope. "You're pregnant, Mrs. Young," he said with a kind smile. "About 6 weeks along, I'd estimate. Given your history, we'll want to monitor you closely, but everything looks healthy so far." Adelaide walked home in a daze, her hand pressed to her belly where new life was growing against all odds. The doctor in Milwaukee had said she probably could not have children, and Adelaide had accepted that as fact. But apparently probably was not the same as certainly, and miracles still happened in this world. Bennett was in the barn when she got home, grooming the horses after a long day at the ranch. Adelaide stood in the doorway, watching him work, trying to find the words. "Bennett," she said finally, and something in her voice made him turn immediately. "What's wrong?" he asked, coming toward her with concern in his eyes. "Are you ill? You've been looking pale lately." "I'm not ill," Adelaide said, and suddenly she was smiling, tears streaming down her face. I'm pregnant. We're going to have a baby." Bennett froze, his expression shifting from concern to disbelief to overwhelming joy in the space of a heartbeat. "A baby? You're sure?" "Dr. Harrison confirmed it this afternoon," Adelaide said. "I'm about 6 weeks along." "Bennett, I know the doctor in Milwaukee said I probably couldn't have children, but here we are. It's really happening." Bennett crossed the space between them in 2 long strides and swept Adelaide into his arms, lifting her off her feet and spinning her around. "We're having a baby," he said, his voice full of wonder. "Adelaide, we're going to be parents." He set her down carefully, his hands moving to cradle her face. "Are you happy? Is this what you want?" "More than anything," Adelaide said, covering his hands with her own. "I'm scared too because of what happened before. But mostly I'm just so happy I can barely breathe. We're going to be a family, Bennett." "We already are a family," Bennett said, kissing her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "But this is the most wonderful news. A baby. Our baby." They held each other in the barn as the sun set, making plans and dreaming dreams. Bennett insisted that Adelaide must take things easy, must not work too hard or lift anything heavy. Adelaide laughed and told him she was pregnant, not made of glass, but she was touched by his concern. They talked about names, about where the baby would sleep, about all the changes a child would bring to their lives. The pregnancy progressed well, though Adelaide was sick most mornings for the first 3 months. Bennett hovered anxiously, bringing her dry toast and ginger tea, holding her hair when she was ill. He took over more of the work at the boarding house, insisting that Adelaide rest as much as possible. Dr. Harrison examined her monthly and assured them that everything was developing normally, though he warned them to be cautious given Adelaide's history. As Adelaide's belly grew round with new life, she found herself thinking often about her mother, wishing she could share this experience with the woman who had brought her into the world. But she had Bennett, steady and loving and excited about becoming a father. And she had the small community they had built in Mineral Point, neighbors and friends who congratulated them and offered advice and baby clothes. Even Martha Henderson unbent enough to offer a begrudging congratulations, though she could not resist adding that Adelaide was fortunate to have caught a husband before her past caught up with her. Adelaide chose to ignore the barb, secure in the knowledge of Bennett's love and her own worth. The baby came on a warm September evening, 3 days before Adelaide's due date. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next day. Dr. Harrison stayed with them the entire time, monitoring Adelaide's progress and offering what comfort he could. Bennett refused to leave, holding Adelaide's hand through each contraction, murmuring encouragement and love. When their son finally arrived, red-faced and squalling with indignation at his abrupt entry into the world, Adelaide wept with relief and joy. Bennett cut the cord with shaking hands while the doctor wrapped the baby in a clean blanket. "A healthy boy," Dr. Harrison announced, placing the infant in Adelaide's arms. 8 pounds if I'm any judge, with a good strong cry. Adelaide looked down at her son, at his tiny perfect features and the dark hair that was already thick on his head, and felt her heart expand in a way she had not known was possible. This was her child, hers and Bennett's, created from love and brought into the world despite all the odds against them. "Hello, little one," she whispered, touching his small hand, his fingers wrapped around hers instinctively, holding on with surprising strength. "Welcome to the world." Bennett sat beside them on the bed, his arm around Adelaide's shoulders, his eyes locked on his son's face. "He's perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Adelaide, he's absolutely perfect." "What should we name him?" Adelaide asked, though they had discussed this for months. "James," Bennett said immediately, the name they had chosen together. James Richard Young, after your father. Adelaide looked up at him in surprise. Are you sure? After everything he did? He tried to make amends at the end, Bennett said, and more importantly, you forgave him. That speaks to your strength and grace, Adelaide. I want our son to carry that name as a reminder that people can change, that tomorrow can be better than yesterday. James Richard Young, Adelaide repeated, looking down at her son. Jamie, I like it. The weeks that followed were exhausting and exhilarating. Jamie was a demanding baby, waking every few hours to nurse and fussing when he was wet or hungry or simply wanting to be held. Adelaide was tired in a way she had never experienced, but she was also happier than she could remember being. Bennett was a devoted father, walking the floors with Jamie when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, and looking at his son with such pure love that it made Adelaide's heart ache. They had to reduce the number of boarders Adelaide took in, needing the space and quiet for their growing family. But Bennett's partnership at the Hutchinson Ranch was providing well, and they were comfortable even with the reduced income from the boarding house. As Jamie grew from a newborn to an infant and then a toddler, Adelaide marveled at the life they had built. This child, who according to one doctor should never have existed, was thriving. He had Bennett's blue eyes and Adelaide's dark hair, and a personality that was entirely his own, stubborn and sweet and endlessly curious about the world. On Jamie's second birthday, Adelaide discovered she was pregnant again. This time there was no panic, only joy and gratitude. Their daughter was born the following spring, arriving much faster than her brother had. They named her Clara Mee, after Bennett's mother, and she had her father's golden hair and her mother's determined chin. Life in the Mineral Point boarding house was full and chaotic and wonderful. Bennett had fully partnered with Jacob Hutchinson now, and they were building the ranch into one of the most successful operations in the region. Adelaide had converted the boarding house into a family home, though she still took in the occasional guest when someone needed a place to stay. The years passed in a blur of childhood milestones and hard work and deep contentment. Jamie started school and proved to be a bright student with a gift for numbers. Clara was more adventurous, always climbing trees and begging to ride the horses. Adelaide and Bennett watched their children grow with pride and wonder, marveling at how fortunate they were. When Adelaide's father died during Jamie's 4th year, she traveled to Milwaukee for the funeral with Bennett at her side. It was a small service, attended by only a handful of people. Adelaide stood at her father's grave and felt only a quiet sadness, the old anger long since faded. She had forgiven him years ago, and now she could remember the good parts of her childhood without the pain of his rejection overshadowing everything else. Are you all right? Bennett asked as they left the cemetery. I am, Adelaide said, and meant it. He was my father, and I'll always carry some love for him despite everything. But my real family is you and Jamie and Clara. You're the ones who matter most. When Jamie was 8 and Clara was 6, Bennett and Adelaide finally purchased their own land, a beautiful spread of hills and meadows about 5 miles outside Mineral Point. Jacob Hutchinson sold them the acreage at a fair price, having become more friend than employer over the years. They built a house together, Bennett and Adelaide and Jacob and his sons, raising the frame in a long weekend of hard work and laughter. The house was not grand, but it was theirs, built with their own hands and filled with their own love. It had 4 bedrooms, a large kitchen where Adelaide could cook the meals she loved preparing, and a wide porch where they could sit in the evenings and watch their children play. They called it Tomorrow Ranch, a name that made Bennett smile every time he said it. It was a reminder of the belief that had brought them together, the conviction that the future held more promise than the past held pain. Adelaide stood on that porch one summer evening when she was 32 years old, watching Bennett teach Jamie how to rope a fence post while Clara chased chickens around the yard. Her hands were rough from work, her face tanned from the sun, and she had never been happier. This was the life she had never thought she would have, the family she had been told she could not create. The past was still there, part of her story but no longer the whole of it. She was Adelaide Young, wife and mother, ranch owner and survivor. She was a woman who had been broken and had learned to heal, who had been told she was worthless and had proven that lie false. Bennett looked up from his lesson with Jamie and caught her watching. He grinned and waved, and Adelaide waved back, her heart full to bursting with love for this man who had seen her at her worst and loved her anyway. "Mama," Clara called, running toward the porch. "Come play with us." "I'm coming," Adelaide called back, walking down the steps to join her family. The years continued to pass, bringing new challenges and new joys. When Jamie was 14, a wandering minister came through Mineral Point and preached a powerful sermon about redemption and second chances. Adelaide and Bennett sat in the congregation with their children, holding hands and remembering how far they had come. After the service, the minister spoke with them, and they found themselves sharing their story about the darkness of their pasts and the light they had found together. "You've built something beautiful," the minister said, looking at their family with approval. "You've proven that God's grace is real and that no one is beyond redemption." "We just proved that tomorrow is always possible," Bennett said, his arm around Adelaide's shoulders. "That's the only sermon I ever needed." Clara grew into a spirited young woman who could ride and rope as well as any cowboy. She had her father's determination and her mother's fierce heart. Jamie was quieter, more thoughtful, but with a gift for working with animals that surpassed even Bennett's considerable skill. They were good children who had been raised with love and discipline, taught to value honesty and hard work and kindness. When Adelaide was 40, she received word that Thomas, her former fiancé, had died in Milwaukee. The news came in a letter from a distant cousin who thought she should know. Adelaide read the letter once and then burned it in the kitchen stove, feeling nothing but a distant pity for the man who had rejected her all those years ago. She wondered briefly if he had ever found happiness, if he had ever regretted his choices. Then she dismissed the thoughts and went to find Bennett, wanting the comfort of his presence. "You all right?" Bennett asked when she came into the barn where he was working. "Thomas died," Adelaide said simply. "I just found out." Bennett set down the bridle he was mending and came to her immediately. "How do you feel about that?" Adelaide thought about the question carefully. "Indifferent, mostly. Maybe a little sad that he wasted so much of his life worrying about appearances and other people's opinions. But mostly I just feel grateful that I didn't marry him. If I had, I never would have found you, never would have had this life." "I'm sorry he hurt you," Bennett said, pulling her into his arms. "But I'm grateful too, even though that makes me selfish." "You're the best thing that ever happened to me, Adelaide. You and our children, this ranch, this life. It's everything I never knew I wanted." "It's everything neither of us thought we could have," Adelaide corrected. "We were both so broken, so convinced we were unworthy of happiness. But we found each other, and we built something good. Tomorrow Ranch," Bennett said with a smile. "Named for the belief that got us through." As Adelaide aged, her hair turning silver and lines appearing around her eyes, she never lost that sense of gratitude for the life she had been given. She watched Jamie marry a sweet girl from town, a school teacher named Sarah who loved him fiercely. She danced at their wedding with tears of joy streaming down her face, remembering her own wedding day and the leap of faith she had taken. Clara married a few years later, choosing a rancher from Montana who matched her spirit and strength. It was harder to let Clara go, knowing she would be far away, but Adelaide saw the love between her daughter and her new husband and knew Clara would be happy. And through it all, Bennett was there, steady and loving and true. They grew old together, their bodies aging but their love only deepening with time. They sat on their porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the sun set over their land, counting their blessings and remembering how far they had come. When Adelaide was 62, she fell ill with pneumonia during a particularly harsh winter. Dr. Harrison, now quite elderly himself, came to treat her and warned Bennett that it was serious. For 2 weeks, Adelaide battled the illness while Bennett sat vigil at her bedside, holding her hand and telling her stories of their life together. "You have to get better," Bennett said one night when her fever was particularly high. "I'm not done with you yet, Adelaide Young. We have more tomorrows to share." Adelaide, drifting in and out of consciousness, squeezed his hand weakly. "Always tomorrow," she whispered. She did recover, though it took months for her to fully regain her strength. Bennett nursed her with patient devotion, feeding her broth and reading to her and helping her walk when she was finally strong enough. The illness had frightened them both, a reminder that their time together was not infinite. "I'm not ready to lose you," Bennett said one evening as Adelaide sat bundled in blankets on the porch, breathing in the spring air. "You won't," Adelaide promised. "Not for a long time yet. I'm too stubborn to die before I'm ready, and I'm not ready to leave you or our grandchildren." Jamie and Sarah had blessed them with 4 grandchildren, 2 boys and 2 girls who called them Grandma and Grandpa, and filled Tomorrow Ranch with laughter whenever they visited. Clara had 3 children of her own in Montana, and though Adelaide did not see them as often, they corresponded regularly and visited when they could. Adelaide lived to see all 7 of her grandchildren grow to adulthood. She lived to see the turn of the century, marveling at the changes the new century brought. She lived to see Jamie take over the operation of Tomorrow Ranch, watching her son prove himself as capable and dedicated as his father. And through it all, she had Bennett. They celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren. The house and yard full of family who had come from as far as Montana to mark the occasion. Adelaide looked around at the gathering and felt overwhelmed by the abundance of love and life that had sprung from 2 broken people who had dared to believe in tomorrow. "Did you ever imagine this?" she asked Bennett as they danced slowly in the yard, their grandchildren clapping and cheering. "When we met all those years ago, did you ever think we'd have all this?" "I hoped," Bennett said, his arms strong around her despite his 75 years. "I saw something special in you from the beginning, Adelaide. I saw strength and courage and a heart that refused to give up despite everything you'd been through. I knew that if you could just learn to believe in yourself the way I believed in you, there was nothing we couldn't do together." "You saved me," Adelaide said, her eyes filling with tears. "I was so lost, so convinced I was unworthy of love or happiness, and you showed me that none of that was true." "We saved each other," Bennett corrected. "I was just as lost as you were, Adelaide. I was running from my past, convinced that I could never escape my father's shadow. But you showed me that I could be my own man, that I could build a life I was proud of. We gave each other permission to heal, to grow, to become the people we were meant to be." Adelaide stood on tiptoe to kiss him, ignoring the cheers of their grandchildren. "I love you, Bennett Young. I have loved you since that first night when you looked at me and saw a person instead of a scandal. I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "And I love you," Bennett said, his voice thick with emotion. "My beautiful Adelaide, who taught me that tomorrow is always worth believing in." They danced until the sun set, surrounded by the family they had created and the life they had built. Adelaide felt tired but content, grateful for every moment, every triumph, every hardship that had brought them to this place. Bennett died peacefully in his sleep 2 years later, at the age of 77. Adelaide woke one morning to find him lying still beside her, a slight smile on his face as if he had been dreaming of something pleasant. She held his hand for a long time, whispering her goodbyes and thanking him for the 52 years they had shared. The funeral was large, attended by seemingly half of southwestern Wisconsin. Bennett had been respected and loved by all who knew him, a man of integrity and kindness who had built something lasting. Adelaide stood at his grave with her children on either side of her, watching as they lowered the man she loved into the earth. "He believed in tomorrow," Adelaide said to Jamie and Clara that evening as they sat together at Tomorrow Ranch. "Even when he had every reason not to, he believed that the future could be better. He saved me with that belief, and I want you both to carry it forward. No matter what hardships you face, no matter what mistakes you make, remember that tomorrow always holds possibility." "We will, Mama," Clara promised, taking Adelaide's hand. "You and Papa taught us that. You showed us what love looks like, what redemption looks like. We'll honor that." Adelaide lived 3 more years after Bennett's death, years that were quieter and slower, but still rich with meaning. She spent time with her grandchildren, sharing stories of their grandfather and the life they had built together. She wrote letters to Clara in Montana and had long talks with Jamie about the running of the ranch. She sat on her porch in the evenings, looking out over the land she and Bennett had claimed and improved, remembering. On a warm September evening, exactly 55 years after she had met Bennett Young, Adelaide sat in her favorite chair on the porch and watched the sun set one last time. She felt tired in a way that went bone deep, but she was not afraid. She had lived a full life, had loved and been loved, had built something lasting from the ruins of her past. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose, Adelaide closed her eyes and thought about tomorrow. Not the earthly tomorrow that would come with the dawn, but the greater tomorrow that Bennett had gone ahead to. She thought about seeing him again, about being reunited with the love of her life. "I'm coming, Bennett," she whispered. "I'm ready now." Jamie found her the next morning, sitting peacefully in her chair with a smile on her face. He wept as he closed her eyes, but he knew she would have wanted no tears. She had lived exactly the life she had chosen, had found exactly the love she deserved. They buried Adelaide beside Bennett on a hill overlooking Tomorrow Ranch with a simple headstone that read, "Adelaide Young, 1850–1928. Beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She believed in tomorrow." The ranch passed to Jamie and his family, who ran it with the same dedication and love that Bennett and Adelaide had shown. The boarding house in Mineral Point still stood, though it had been converted to other uses over the years. But the story of the woman who had run it, and the cowboy who had arrived one dusty afternoon looking for a room, became part of the town's history, told and retold as an example of love and redemption. And on warm summer evenings, when the sun set over the rolling hills of Wisconsin, the people of Mineral Point would sometimes speak of Bennett and Adelaide Young, the 2 broken people who had built Tomorrow Ranch and proved that the future could be better than the past, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, and that tomorrow was always worth believing in. Their grandchildren carried their lessons forward, teaching their own children about perseverance and hope, and the power of second chances. The story spread through the generations, a reminder that no past is too dark, no wound too deep, that healing and happiness are possible for those brave enough to believe. Tomorrow Ranch still operated well into the 20th century, a testament to the vision of two people who had refused to let their pasts define their futures. And though Bennett and Adelaide were gone, their legacy lived on in every person who heard their story and found the courage to believe that tomorrow could be different, that love was possible, that redemption was real. They had taken their pain and their mistakes and their broken pieces and created something beautiful. They had looked at their dark pasts and chosen to believe in a bright future. And in doing so, they had proved that the most powerful force in the world is not violence or hatred or fear, but the simple, stubborn belief that tomorrow will be better than today, that love can conquer all, and that every person, no matter how fallen or broken, deserves a second chance at happiness. This was the legacy of Adelaide Stone and Bennett Young, the woman who thought her past was too dark, and the cowboy who told her his was darker. And together, they built a tomorrow brighter than either had dared to dream possible.